Hey everybody, it's Drew with Southern Yankee Innovations, and we're going to go over some log cabin repairs we've been working on. This cabin is kind of aged poorly over time, and we ended up having to replace around 18 logs. With the bottom log on the east side, since we couldn't get access to it from the back side with the addition, we lagged on the 2x4 and then we bolted in a 4x4 to that also. And that allowed us to be able to jack up the cabin enough to relieve the tension off the bottom log. We did have to cut some nails. There was nails from the studs from the addition into the logs. You have to be careful not to jack too much. It'll cause everything to shift. We have bracing throughout the cabin to keep everything from moving around. But the least amount of movement, the best. Especially with this, it has a brand new roof on it. She put it on last year. And then on the other side, I found which works best is just the nylon chainsaw wedges. You just drive them against each other to shim up the cabin, and then it allows you to just take the pressure off the log and be able to wiggle it out. You can see on this wall here, we'd already replaced 7 logs. This wall didn't have a window originally, but the customer wants to add a window that open up and bring in a little extra light. The logs out, we take a bunch of measurements off the original one and we cut the replacement log to length, and then once the length is cut, we'll go ahead and start working on our notches. When we're cutting our notches, we try to level the log up as much as we can, and then we'll use a T-bevel and get our angle. And we'll come over and transpose that onto the new log. It takes quite a bit of practice. You got to make sure you keep the saw nice and level. You don't want to cause it to dip or dive or roll. And then the least amount of material you take out, especially when you're first starting to do this, the better. And then you can always come back and trim it and make it fit better. If you take too much out, then you're going to have to try to shim the log later, or start with a new log. Once we have all the ends cut, we can go ahead and slide the far side in. So the bottom notch on this front corner is just a square notch, so it made it a whole lot easier and faster to cut. Once everything's in place, you can go ahead and lower down the jack, and you got to kind of ease the shims out. The only downfall with the nylon shims is they are slippery, so sometimes when you start to drive them out, they go out too fast. So the downfall of replacing a log on a cabin that has a brand new roof on it is you can't really jack it up enough where you can just roll the log out because of the notch. So you have to cut or break off the end of the notch and then slide the log out. And then when you cut your new log, you can't have that part of the notch on it to get it in place, and then you just can make a replacement piece for it later. So you can see here, since we're not doing a full notch on the bottom, you can just make a level straight in cut and then cut down on the back notch. All the notches on the cabin are steeple notches, so it does make things a little bit different than if you're doing like a half dovetail cabin. So we use scrap 2x4s on the left side, and then we can just slide the log in place and then shim it with those 2x4s to kind of adjust our elevation to try to keep the logs level. Alright, then we went above the window, and again we just use those nylon shims. The ones I found work best are actually the roughneck shims, or like the steel shims. There's some aftermarket ones that they just don't grip very well, and every time you try to pound them in, they just bounce back out. Those other two kind of hold up pretty well. And we just repeat the steps. We'll go ahead and cut it to length. Then we'll measure the inside, or the peak of the notch on one end to the peak of the notch on the other, to make sure that everything's spaced out properly. The problem with some of these older cabins, and if they've had logs replaced, is they may not be consistently the same measurement from log to log. They may be off 2 or 3 inches depending on how each log is cut. So measuring the notches and making sure that they're centered consistently all the way up through. So he's going through here and he's making sure, he's checking the width of the log to find the center point, to know where to put the peak of the steeple notch. Once he gets the width straight, then he'll go ahead and get the depth. So this cabin has had several repairs over time, so some of the logs are 8 inches wide, some of them are 6 inches wide. So we just have to go ahead and kind of adjust the depth each time to make sure that it'll fall properly on the log above it. When you do the bottom notch, we'll take the old log and measure from the peak of the bottom notch to the peak of the top notch, and that'll give us our height at the corner. And we'll measure down, and then that'll give us the peak height, and then we'll measure back from the end of the log, as well as from peak to peak on the left side of the log to the right side of the log, to make sure all the distances and heights are proper. One of the other things you need to account for when you're replacing these logs, you need to measure the log that's coming out, if possible, to see, the left side of the log might be 8 inches high, and the right side of the log may be 10 inches high. And you need to make sure you try to match that going all the way up through. That way the cabin stays level, and you don't run into issues of hitting the log above it or below it. So when we went to put this one in, the left side was just a little snug, so all we did was just take the chainsaw in and just adjust the notch just a little bit. I call it shadowing. You just take enough pressure off and you run the saw up through the joint, and it just takes out a little bit of material to allow it to slide in. So we tried to close a gap on the underside of this log, so we took a very deep bottom cut and a shallow top cut to allow the gap below the log to kind of fill in a little bit better. If there's a large gap above the log, you can drop down the peak of the top part of the notch, and that'll shorten the gap up on the upper side. Here you can see how effective the shims are. We're going to go ahead and replace the log on the front side, and so we just drive the shims in, one on each side, and you can just watch how quick and easy the log goes up. Once the shim bottoms out, we'll just usually kind of hold it and drive from the other side. All it does is take enough pressure off that you can get the log to slide out. You can see how short that log is below it, and all we wanted to do was get something that stuck out a little further. So we went ahead, we cut off the end of the log, or the end of the notch where it kind of grabs onto the log below it, so we could pull it out. We had a window on the left side, and then we just pulled it out, and we cut a replacement. We were able to slide it right back in with very little time. Here he lowers it down, and then the shim pops. The cabin kind of jolts a little bit. We try to avoid that as much as we can. Sometimes it's going to happen. I used a laser level to score up the window lines, and we could just go ahead and trace them down with a marker and cut it, and then we had our whole window space squared and cut out. Once all the logs are out, we went ahead and framed it up, and that's kind of where we're at for now. Coming up soon, we'll go ahead and do some chinking, and we'll get some more content for that. Thank you.